Hello and welcome to this Sanut TV special report. Today we're looking at the government's recent announcement of how the country is going to head towards a carbon net zero future. It has huge implications for manufacturing, of course. I'm joined by Martin Chilcott of Manufacture2030, whose company advises manufacturers on how they can achieve greater sustainability and head towards that carbon net zero goal. Martin, a very warm welcome to you. When you saw the government's announcement, what was your immediate thought?
Well, I was delighted that it was at least making a step in the right direction and making the kinds of commitments that we need to be made. I was a little cynical because it's coming from a government that makes a lot of big commitments and very, very rarely seems to follow through on them. Having said that, I was also reassured that it's part of a pattern I think we're seeing across the world where activist government is no longer seen in opposition to the private sector, but a partner to the private sector. And we absolutely need a partnership between the public and the private sector to be able to enable the transition to a low carbon economy, the green revolution that we so desperately need. So my overall positive, but let's see the detail, let's see the meat.
I think that's pretty much how the manufacturing sector is feeling, because it was as if an awful lot of wonderful things were going to come into existence, but it didn't mention the how and the who. It just mentioned that they would come about. Lots of investment in more renewables, etc., etc. And UK manufacturers are hoping that a lot of this won't just go overseas. That would be a tragedy, wouldn't it?
That would be very sad. And I think given that this oven-baked Brexit deal isn't quite so oven-baked and is causing manufacturing huge amounts of problems and challenges, I think it is incredibly important that we take this opportunity to restart, in a sense, manufacturing and choose a revolution to get behind and engaged in 100% so we can own a big slice of it. Otherwise, I really fear for manufacturing in the UK.
Well, let's look at that, because clearly there is an opportunity, and we've reported many times on companies who are taking an aggressive step towards carbon net zero in their processes and some even in their products, and are discovering competitive advantage in it. This is a terrific message to get across, as well as a huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, indeed it is. And I think what is now accepted by economists, from the IMF to our current government, to the Fed in the US and to the Bank of England, is that a transition to a low carbon economy is a growth opportunity. For a long time, it's been thought of as a cost. I mean, all that stuff written by people like Nigel Lawson and the Global Warming Institute about how we could never afford the transition. Clearly, this is an opportunity for growing and expanding the economy. That means there will be tremendous opportunities. Now, of course, there are going to be some losers. And I think you can see the kinds of companies that are going to win and the kind of companies that are going to struggle. If we just think of them as in that way for a second. So, companies that are inflexible, companies that have fixed sunk investments into assets that they have to get a return from, that are high carbon. Those that are very successful in the current paradigm are going to find it very difficult to shift. Those with short-term shareholders who are going to want to get a return today, and then don't care about 5 years' time. They're going to get right up to the wall before they really make the moves they have to make. And those businesses will go bust, and they will be big names. I mean, we've seen this very recently. If you just take Encyclopedia Britannica, was in every household in Middle America. And within a few years, it was Wikipedia. Wikipedia doesn't even have a secure revenue model, but Encyclopedia went bust. So you can take the biggest, most secure businesses, and in a way, those are the ones that are going to struggle most. And those that are flexible, those that have leadership and not just management, are the ones who can seize this opportunity, I think.
What I find intriguing is that for the last few years, we've been talking about the importance of companies adopting digital technologies to enable them to be more flexible, agile, open to change. And of course, COVID-19 has demonstrated that the companies that did adopt digital technologies have been able to pivot very quickly in order to protect themselves from slumping order books and that kind of thing. I find that now the sustainability argument is beginning to weave itself into the digitalisation argument to help British companies get back in front of the game, because we're severely lagging at the moment, certainly in terms of digitalisation, robotics and so on, from our competitors. This is an opportunity for UK manufacturing to get back in the game and to start leading.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And digitization, I think, is an essential enabler. It's absolutely fundamental. If we look at what's required to make this transition, we're going to have to account for and deal with not just the carbon that we generate in our own assets and our own factories, but we're going to have to account for what happens in our supply chains. And that is going to mean that we're going to have exceedingly good, and they will have to be digital, systems for enable to the flow of a new currency. Let's call it a new currency. Carbon will become a new currency. And we will need to have flows of carbon across supply chains and supply webs which are secure and yet transparent at the point at which they are required. And so that level of digitization is going to be incredibly important. And how those types of systems integrate with things like the Internet of Things is just going to be an incredible opportunity for businesses, but also obviously an area of not insignificant investment.
So let's circle back to where we started, which was the government plans. Industry will say inevitably that in order to make this happen, if the government is going to impose obligations on industry, well, government is going to have to back that up with hard cash and maybe even support for more expensive energy, if that energy at the moment, if renewable energy, which obviously is an absolutely key component of future manufacturing, if that is more expensive. I mean, the government is going to have to put its hand in its pocket at a moment when those pockets are looking decidedly empty.
Oh yeah, they are. They are. There's a lot of difficulty, and that is why, of course, Boris Johnson's promise of £12 billion to get us to net zero feels so painfully thin, and that's where the plan and the announcement is looking weak. PwC, I think, estimate that it's going to take us about 400 billion, not 12 billion, 400 billion to get to net zero. It's only, in fact, that the government are putting forward is 4 billion of new money. I mean, the rest of it is just moving counters around, I think. So we are, a couple of factors out here. There's a long way to go. However, having said that, I think it's recognised now in this kind of new partnership between public and private that when the public sector puts money in, if it puts a 1% in greater investment into green technologies, that the private sector tends to follow with more than a 10% increase. So this is about signaling, I think, at this point in time, as opposed to the depth of the investment that needs to be made. I expect much more to come in time, in stages, creative ways in which government back and supports and reuses existing funds like Innovate UK and et cetera, to push more into this area. But at the moment it is thin. There are a couple of other interesting areas, I think, that need to be tackled that aren't being spoken about. There is going to have to be a rising price for carbon, and there will have to be some sort, I think, of carbon taxation and redistribution of revenues in a sort of dividend form. It's very popular with the Republicans in the States, or some Republicans in the States at the moment, to make sure that we don't have a new left behind portion of the population who struggles, because in the short term, during the transition, there may well be an increase in the cost for heating homes and so on. I don't think it's anything like the horror stories that have been suggested, because there are so many potential efficiencies, but we are talking about a lot of investment to transition from where we are to where we need to.
And I think it's very important also to stress that we in the UK tend to have a feeling that, well, if the government's not going to do enough, well, there's no point in us doing it. The fact of the matter is that there are some very progressive manufacturers who are already seizing the challenge posed by carbon net zero, and they are the ones who are getting ahead of the game already. Waiting for government is no answer. It is possible to start now.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. I mean, there are, a series of opportunities here, aren't there? There is the opportunity around clean energy. How do we electrify transport? How do we remove gas as our central form of heating for all our homes and perhaps replace it with something like hydrogen? How do we support heavy energy intensive industries with new carbon and capture and storage technologies? There are opportunities around, what you might call the kind of making the processes of manufacturing more sustainable. And in many ways, that's where we have to start. We need to start with using less natural resource, whether it's energy or materials or waters. That's where you have to start. Use less to get more productivity. I mean, that is step one for everybody to do. Step two is then thinking about how do we make it renewable? How do we use renewable sources? How do we reuse resources? How do we redesign so that we are not just, as you say, producing to sell and consume? We're manufacturing in order as part of a circular economy. So all of these represent significant opportunities, and we tend to focus on those and we understand them. But I think there is a swathe of opportunities for manufacturers to support the other bits of the economy that have to transition. And we don't often talk about this, but one of the biggest areas that has to transition is, of course, agriculture. So a great chunk of our emissions are in agriculture. And a lot of that is in livestock. And it's because livestock produce a lot of methane. So people are beginning to invent and design new types of livestock. Well, who's going to manufacture the laboratories that is going to produce that livestock? Who's going to produce the kit that is the new kit that's going to be required to produce whatever it is, these new feedstocks that are going to be developed? And so I take that as an example because we tend not to, when you talk about what are the opportunities for manufacturing, you very rarely see, well, transforming agriculture is an opportunity for manufacturers. There are hosts of opportunities within there that we could be targeting niche markets, which will be highly valuable. So from the big picture of, well, how do we do carbon capture and storage? How do we get transmission and clean transmission and storage of electricity? How do we deal with our homes? Those are all the big pieces, and absolutely they're there. And the idea of having, clean industrial hubs in the northeast and the northwest and in Wales is all great. But across our economy, this transformation has to take place. And there are lots and lots of highly profitable niches which will be arising, and we need to focus on as well.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Martin Chilcott from Manufacture 2030. Their website address is on your screen now. Do go and check it out. There's a lot of information there. There's also a lot of information carried in a keynote speech that Sam Turner, the Chief Technical Officer of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, gave at the recent Digital Manufacturing Week. The address of that is also below. Do watch it. It's got a host of information for you about how manufacturers can, should, and will convert to more sustainable practices heading for carbon net zero. This has been a Salute TV special report. I'm Nick Peters. Thank you very much indeed for watching. See you again soon.